Hi, Jeff Bridgman here of Jeff R. Bridgman American Antiques in York County, Pennsylvania. I've come here tonight to tell you about this wonderful American flag, pretty beat up and weathered, and me in dress down mode to match, right? So this belonged to a family in the American West who helped settle the West and weren't exactly predisposed to wearing suits and ties. It is a 15-star flag with 13 stripes, but not made in the period when we had 15 states. That lasted from 1792 to 1796, between the addition of Kentucky as the 15th state and Tennessee as the 16th. Nor was it made in the period when we had officially 15 stars on the flag. That ran from 1795 to 1818. Over this long expanse where we got 5 new states but no stars were added. In that period, we actually had 15 stripes originally. You'll note this has 13, as I said. And when 15-star flags appear later in America, especially in the 19th century, where they are very rare, but they do exist, most all of them have 13 stripes. Probably because, it had been a long time since the 15-star flag was official, and even when it had been, it was flown on ships, it was flown at military garrisons. Ground forces didn't even carry the stars and stripes yet. That didn't happen until the 1830s, 40s, and later. And, where would you have seen one? Private use was almost non-existent. And even if you had seen one with such limited usage, would you remember that it was supposed to have 15 stripes? And by this time, it would be your kids or your grandkids that were making the flags anyway, and of course they knew everything. I'm just kidding. So theoretically, there would be several reasons to make a 15-star flag during the mid-19th century. One would be to actually glorify the number of slave states. There were 15 of them. So that would be pro-Southern solidarity, and would it have 15 stripes? Well, I guess if you were going to give each one a stripe, seems kind of unlikely, but it's possible. But I doubt that would usually be the case. Another reason, and it certainly wasn't the Browns' deal, another reason would be to pay homage to Kentucky as the 15th state, which entered the Union in 1792. Now, in that case, if you were trying to actually replicate something of the period, it would have 15 stripes. So yet another reason to make a 15-star flag during the antebellum would be to remove the southern states from the flag. And I'd never really thought about this until just recently when I was reading a piece of research that suggested such a thing. I had always thought that this really only occurred during the Civil War. But during the Civil War, you can see a little bit of both. So you can see Southerners at the beginning of the war making versions of the Stars and Stripes that removed the northern states. And just the opposite in the North, except you can really see that throughout the war. But I never thought about doing that pre-war. So the suggestion was made that there were some U.S. Navy small boat ensigns with 16 stars made during the 1850s. I'd owned a couple of them, and the theory was that they had 16 stars because the Navy reformed during the period when we had 16 states. That was the late 18th century, following the Revolution, when we had to sell all of our ships to pay debts to France, and for a while had no standing Navy. So the Navy was reformed following the addition of Tennessee, and now we had 16 states. But, I never loved this concept because the 16-star flag was never official. So would the U.S. Navy produce something that it never had in the first place as a commemorative? Maybe. I mean, maybe. It's hard to say, but I never loved the idea. Plus, there were some 16-star flags and 15-star flags that obviously weren't of U.S. Navy manufacture. Was that someone producing something at home to glorify the Navy? I doubt it. This, however, explained a lot of things. This new theory was supported by the existence of a broadside, which is a fancy 19th century term for poster, really, made for the 1856 presidential campaign that was anti-Fremont and so anti-North, pro-South, that had an image in the middle of a 16-star flag that I'd never really paid a lot of attention to. Actually, a rare thing, and I bought one, and I thought they were kind of great, but I never made sense of this 16-star flag with, to one side, all North, and to the other side, no South. That's what the text read. You would think I would put that together, but only in retrospect did I. But then that made a lot of sense because it explained other 16-star and 15-star examples, and maybe 17 stars, maybe 18 stars, maybe 14 stars. So the theory was with the 16-star flags that they were just like the 13-star U.S. Navy small boat ensigns that we know were produced with regularity between the mid-19th century and 1916, at least, if not for a long time before all of that, which made it easier to discern the stars at a distance on a small flag, because if there were 13 of them, for example, as opposed to 31 or 34, that you could identify it as an American flag at a distance better than you could if they were the full star count. So that's what these were supposed to be, but then there were homemade ones, and now you can explain all of them, really. Newspaper articles found by the researcher showed Southern newspapers reporting U.S. Navy ships flying 16-star flags. And whether propaganda or not, that was supposedly removing the Southern states from the flag. Why would that make sense for a U.S. Navy flag in the 1850s? Well, it was outside of wartime. You have to think about what was the Navy doing at that time. The slave trade was illegal. It was big money. Human trafficking into the states, was big business at the time. Mostly they were chasing slave traders. There you go. So now let's talk a little bit about the family that owned this and try to put things together. Now, the family's name was Brown, and in it were two men named John Brown, father and son, but neither being the John Brown of Bleeding Kansas fame that was executed at Harper's Ferry, the abolitionist, the killing of which really fueled everything that was going on to the point of war. This John Brown lived in a relatively the same time frame. He was born in Worcester, Massachusetts on December 22nd of 1817. Why am I telling you the exact date? Well, what's important about December 22nd? Anybody know? If you're from Massachusetts, you might know. Landing of the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock, December 22nd. That was just the first of a long series of patriotic events, if you will, that really marked the life of a true American patriot, abolitionist, woodsman, incredible frontiersman, loved all people of all kinds, and really changed American history, and just gets overshadowed by a guy with the same name, right? At any rate, this John Brown, born in Worcester, moves with his family to St. Louis. Both of his parents unfortunately die there, and he's orphaned. He grows up, however, the best he can, and he works a series of different jobs and eventually ends up working on riverboats. On one trip south, all the way down to Galveston, he's shipwrecked. And instead of coming back to St. Louis, he decides, well, I want to go off and make my own way. So he goes up the Red River, all the way through Texas, all the way to Fort Leavenworth, where he joins up with the forces of Sam Houston in the middle of the Texas Revolution, right at a time where he can go with him to chase down Santa Anna. And so he arrives there right after the Battle of the Alamo and joins up with Sam Houston at the point that he chases down Santa Anna, and he watches Santa Anna get captured in probably the most significant 19th century event of Texas history. Amazing. Then he goes from there and goes out west, and for the next 14 years spends time becoming one of the greatest American woodsmen, trappers, frontiersmen, hunter, and guide that exists in America. And he meets all sorts of people of the same ilk with whom he befriends and travels with, including Old Bill Williams, Dick Owens, John Burroughs, James Bridger, Kit Carson, the Sublets, the Bents, anybody just about you can think of that's alive at that time. He is out there, boots on the ground, with all of these characters. So because some of these guys lived into the late 19th century, when photography had developed, I mean, we had photography in the 1840s, but there wasn't much of it until later. But some of these explorers lived a long time, and because of their fame and because we were lucky that they sat for photographs, we actually have images of some of these characters who spent a long time in the far-flung West. Here are some of them. Now, on the top, you'll see the Bents. So Mabel Bent was considered the queen of the explorers. But the most famous here is on the bottom row. That is Kit Carson. So John Brown Sr. and Kit Carson in the 1840s actually were guides for none other than John Fremont, the Pathfinder, who received federal funding to map the Oregon Trail. And he made 5 journeys, one of which he went into California, and he, with just 100 guys, took both San Francisco and Los Angeles, even though Pico, who was in charge of California from a military perspective for Mexico, wasn't actually there at the time. It was still a bold move, and it really opened California to statehood. Now, Fremont was an abolitionist, and he would go on to become one of California's first 2 senators after statehood, that followed shortly thereafter, and he became the first nominee for the presidency from the Republican Party, newly formed in 1856 on the anti-slavery ticket. So Fremont and Freedom was one of the primary slogans of the campaign, and it must be that Fremont had some influence probably on John Brown, who I'm sure already had his own opinions, but seems to have been predispositioned not to judge people by their color, creed, religion, or anything else. So I think it was easy for him to get on board with Fremont and really ride the train with the Republican Party. He seems to have been, despite being a woodsman, politically motivated, wanting to do the best he could for whatever settlement he eventually ended up in. Now, on the way out there, he helped build all sorts of forts. Fort Laramie, Fort Bridger, Fort Bent. I mean, some of these were named after the guys he was actually with at the time. Amazing. He helped build Fort Pueblo, and he was a friend of both Native Americans to Mexicans, and he in fact took a Mexican wife. Louisa was her name, and she had a daughter, and she had actually been married to a freed slave. The slave, his name was John Beckwith, actually left them, and after he did, John Brown Sr. Befriended her and took care of the daughter, took care of her to whatever extent he could, and they eventually got married. They would end up having 6 girls and 4 boys. When at Fort Pueblo, John Brown Jr. was born. So when they were there, in present-day Colorado, back then it was the New Mexico territory, they had gathered up a whole bunch of pelts, beaver pelts and buffalo skins, and they thought that they were maybe going to go to California to try to sell them. On the way there, their wagon train was attacked by a group of Apaches, and several people were killed. The entire wagon train was taken, and Louisa and John Jr. almost died. Some of Louisa's companions on the trip were yelling to her to throw John, he was only 1 year old, to throw him from the horse because she was going to be captured otherwise. And she said, no, I don't think so. And she jumped a ravine, holding on to John Jr. by his neck as hard as she possibly could, to the point where it was said afterwards, and they survived, that he could never hold his head up quite straight. When he was 2 years old, they continued on, and they actually entered Salt Lake, now settled by Mormons, in 1848, 4th of July, I believe, of that year. Now, to understand everything that's going on in the West and why this is important, you have to back up a little bit to understand what's happening in Mormon history. I don't want to drag on too much about that and bore the living death out of you, but if you don't know anything about what was happening in the Mormons, here's the basics. So, under Brigham Young, who was head of the Council of 12, or whatever that was called, I can't remember precisely, back in Nauvoo, Illinois at the time, in 1846, he was preparing to try to move everyone to somewhere else, and was trying to get government funding to do so, and was trying to actually sort of kind of get permission to do so because there was a lot of mistrust between the federal government and the Mormons because they didn't really like one another. So, people just couldn't get all warm and fuzzy about polygamy. As much as America was founded on a lack of religious persecution and freedom to do pretty much whatever you want as long as you didn't hurt anyone, well, they were like, wait a minute, you can't have 2 wives. That doesn't mean you can have 2 wives or 56 wives, as Brigham Young did. But at any rate, the only person that they had as an ally in Washington was Stephen Douglas, who represented that part of Illinois and was happy to get the votes. This is the same Lincoln-Douglas debates that would run against Lincoln in 1860 as the Northern Democrat. So here the two are together. Stephen Douglas, kind of a toad-looking guy, unusual-looking character with a great big head, and Brigham Young, well, if not the best-looking guy in the world, I must say he is looking rather dapper here in this stovepipe hat that's just about as tall as Stephen Douglas, certainly looking sort of formidable. Now, these two became really good friends, and who do you think gave Brigham Young the idea to go to Salt Lake? Who is out there at the time exploring that whole area? John Fremont. Who's sending reports back to the federal government? John Fremont. Who is slipping papers under the desk to Brigham Young? Stephen Douglas, senator, and very connected in Washington. So that's how Brigham Young got his idea. And this was the kind of stuff this was in the government report coming back from Fremont. The Great Salt Lake, one of the wonders of nature, and perhaps without rival in the world, being saturated solution of salt of 100 miles in diameter, is for the first time revealed to our view by one who has surveyed its shores and navigated its waters. The Bear River Valley, with its rich bottoms, fine grass, walled up mountains, hot springs, mineral springs, soda fountains, volcanic rock, volcanic crater, and saline effervescences, and 4,500 feet above sea level, is for the first time described. He goes on to say things like, here, the elevation of the Sierra Nevada being more lofty than the Rocky Mountains accounts for the formation of the Great Basin, as Lieutenant Fremont called it, and of which he is the first to announce its existence to the world. A basin which may hold such a kingdom as France, and which has for its rim a circle of mountains whose summits penetrate the regions of eternal snow, is certainly a new and grand object to be revealed. Who wouldn't want to go to that Pandora? It's amazing, really. Amazing stuff going on in America. They waltz into there, and no white man has ever seen that place to the best of their knowledge. So this is where he gets the idea. So how are they going to get there? Well, what basically happens is Brigham Young sends somebody to Pennsylvania. He talks to a military guy there who's connected in Washington, and they get in front of President Polk. And they go, okay, what can we do here? What can we do to make this work for everyone? Because Polk didn't want these guys out in the West establishing a stronghold and having another, someone to fight. America's at war with Mexico now over Texas, and Polk is spearheading that. And we're still having problems with Native Americans. I mean, this is the 1840s. And, there's just too many fronts to fight on. And how are we going to get the West settled? How are we going to plow our way out there? So Polk goes, I have an idea. How about Brigham Young gives me a couple of hundred guys and shows solidarity, help us with our fight with Mexico, help us trudge a trail to the West and forge a way that people can be transported from here to there, to these places that Fremont has been. And in return, I'll give you each of the guys a stipend of, as a $42, $45 a person for a uniform, but yet they don't have to spend it on uniforms. They don't have to wear a uniform. They can instead take that money, give it to Brigham Young if they want, and there you go. There's your money to fund the move for all the other Mormons out west to Utah. It turns out to be a genius idea. Really is beneficial for both the Mormons and the United States as a whole. There were costs. There were deaths. No doubt. It was not a pretty picture in the end. But I think the outcome probably overall for both groups can be said it was one of the best things that could probably happen at the time. the Mormons weren't making out too great as it was, and America needed help with Mexico. So what was going to happen here was that these guys were going to trudge their way out west and forge a road to these places where Fremont had been. These guys don't have to go to Mexico to fight. They have to forge a trail that others can follow on. And at the same time, Polk doesn't get another foe. He gets an ally, and he can now kind of keep his eye on him. Now, there is kind of chaos going on back in Illinois, in Nauvoo. Joseph Smith, founder of the Mormons, he gets assassinated out there. The Mormons exodus out of Nauvoo. They're now in Iowa, trying to get through Iowa, and that's a mess. American troops meet up with them there, and that's the muster point for the Mormon battalion. The Mormon battalion, formed by Polk, is the only religious military regiment ever formed and funded by the American government. Brigham Young is 100% in. He gives them 550 of his best woodsmen. Mormons aren't too happy, but as I said, genius move for Brigham Young. And these guys end up, they take with them 39 women, 50 some kids, and the women get partway out there, and there's lots of deaths along the way, and they just cannot take these, they can't let them go any longer. So they send all but 5 women to Fort Pueblo and the kids. Now, Fort Pueblo, who built that? Oh, John Brown Sr., who is a master storyteller, who is now just famous in the West, who traveled with Fremont. All these stories are told everywhere you go in the West. John Brown Sr. I mean, once John Brown Sr. actually gets to Salt Lake, and the Mormons are there because this whole contingent, they make the longest military march in American history. 2,000 miles from Council Bluff, Iowa, where they muster, to San Diego. And then, this is in a year, approximately, and then they muster out at Los Angeles, trickle back to Salt Lake. Brigham Young gets there with 130 people or something, and then says, hey, it's okay, come on everybody, and they all come. Thousands of Mormons come in, and these are patriotic people. So back at the muster point in Iowa, before they even leave, they pull out a Stars and Stripes that they rescued from Nauvoo in the melee. It was a mess when they left. But the Mormons, they love the Constitution because that's really for them. They love America and the concept of America. And they already have American flags. They didn't need to get flags from the U.S. government. They had their own regimental flags, looked like Rev War battle flags. They had their own, slogans and stuff on them, and they had Stars and Stripes. And when they got out to Salt Lake, finally, where they were going to be, they celebrated the 4th of July. They raised 100-foot flagpoles, and they flew the American flag. This is at a time where largely in the United States, there wasn't a whole lot of this going on. I mean, people didn't privately use the flag normally until the Civil War. And that's not exactly what's going on here. They're carrying one. I'm not saying everybody had one hanging on their porch, but these are patriotic people. So now you have John Brown Sr. When we last saw him, he was leaving Fort Pueblo, and he was heading for California. His wagon train got stolen, right? He lost all his pelts and whatever. And these guys are they're on their way. They don't have anything, but they're still on their way. And, there's Alexander Godey's with him. Who was the other guy? There's other formidable explorers. So, without those guys, they probably would have never made it at all. But they show up in Salt Lake on July 4th, 1849. This is just about 1 year before California statehood. And amazing. On the 4th of July. So who loves the 4th of July? John Brown Sr. Who loves the 4th of July? The Mormons do. They celebrate it. So we know, because it's been recorded, that they raised an American flag on the 4th of July that year. So here comes John Brown Sr. and he's like, whoa, you know. One thing I didn't tell you, super important about this family, is that John Brown Sr., his grandfather died in the War of 1812, a soldier. His great-grandfather killed at Bunker Hill during the Revolution. So you think this guy is not patriotic? Oh my God. And he was a hero already among the Mormons. And boy, did they want to be his buddy. And he was cool. He was charismatic. He was a great storyteller. This all went very well. So Brown continued on from there with his group, went into California, to Taos, I believe. And he moved around a little bit there, but ended up moving up to San Bernardino. Why? Well, in the meantime, Brigham Young sends a contingent of Mormons up to California to see if they could establish some foothold for the church there. And way more of them leave than he wanted them to, probably because of the gold rush. And the gold rush is going on, 1849. So the Mormons get out to San Bernardino Valley and they decide to build a fort. And in 20 days, they knock out a 750 by 350 approximately foot fort made out of full-on logs. These guys are tough, let me tell you. Scared? I mean, I don't know if they should have been. Look what they did. 20 days. If you had modern equipment and you tried to do that today, that's still be a Herculean task. At any rate, they get established there, and John Brown Sr., he has moved into the area, and in 1852 decides to move right into the fort, and he's very welcome there. He's a hero. He is personal friends with a senator, because California became a state in 1850, so it's now a state, and Fremont's a senator. You think the Mormons didn't want to get along with they sure did, and they already liked John Brown. So now John Brown, he hears that more Mormons are coming after he's moved into the little town, and the Mormons have built it to mimic Salt Lake. They've used the same footprint, the same floor plan for the city to build a little Salt Lake, if you will, as the town inside Fort San Bernardino. When they did that, they built a place for a temple. The temple never got built because the Mormons actually left. Long story. But they also built an area to celebrate the 4th of July. They built a square specifically for that reason. And they built schools. 2 of them right away in 1852. One called Warm Springs, which is still there and operational today, and another that isn't there anymore, but then more schools followed. So John Brown Jr. goes right to school before the schools were even built in 1852 or 51. He starts right at age 5. He's right there in school already. In 1853, John Brown Sr. hears more Mormons are coming. There's no American flag. There is not yet a flag there. So he hops on his horse and he rides 300 miles to pick up an American flag from his friend Sam Bishop at Fort Tejon, to bring it back and raise it on a flagpole for the first July 4th celebration in San Bernardino. Amazing. Now, he goes on to support Fremont for the presidency in 1856. And in 1860, he and his son are now hardcore campaigning for Lincoln for the White House. John Brown Sr. is head of the Republican Party, if you will, in San Bernardino County, which has now become and remains today the largest county in the United States. He campaigns for him not only in that year, but also then again hardcore in 1864, building fires to ignite people in the area for Lincoln for the White House. He is a Union supporter. What is the problem with that? Wasn't California like anti-slavery? No. California was Southern sympathizing, with the exception of an area around Sacramento in Northern California. California was Southern sympathizing. If you were to put it to a vote of the people at the time, California would have seceded from the Union. It was a free state, of course, and that never happened. But it was not a contingent of Unionists. It was pro-slavery. So it was not easy for John Brown, amongst at least non-Mormons, to be a Unionist at the time in the area. And that's what went on to generate the creation of this flag, which is recorded in the diary of John Brown Jr. So let me read you from that, because that's documentation for this incredible flag with its 7 pointed stars, highly unusual. These little girls, they didn't know maybe how many points the stars had to have. They didn't know how many stripes necessarily. Incredible, incredible thing. Very seldom do we ever have any kind of record of this nature, of the making of a flag. And you have to remember too, this is in 1864 supposedly that this happened. Not for the 1860 campaign, but the 1864 campaign. At that time, he would have been like a junior or a senior, basically. He was an elder student at the school. And a whole bunch of girls make him this flag, who probably looked up to him as sort of a hero like his dad. On the opening of the rebellion, when shrieked the timid and stood still the brave, when San Bernardino was filled with rebels, outlaws, and a Union man's life was in jeopardy, a band of Dixities, as they were then known, came and ordered my father to take down the flag from his house, that it were best for him to take the flag down. Fired with courageous indignation, my noble father exclaimed, "My grandfather dies on Bunker Hill. My father died in the War of 1812, upholding their country's flag, and I am now ready to fall before that flag shall go down." The flag remained secure, firm, until after the election of Lincoln, when Warren venerably took it down to preserve it. This little flag was made by my classmates, girls, while at school. The stitches of their heart or hand, can't tell which, cheerfully they worked recesses with their needles. Incredible. So why did the flag made by the little girls look like this? Well, probably because it replicated the flag that John Brown Sr. was flying on his house during this whole episode. It would be an abolitionist flag. Brown would be likely to have such a thing as a staunch abolitionist. It could be that the flag that he picked up from Sam Bishop was the one he was flying off his house when it wasn't flying for the 4th of July, and that it was an earlier flag that he had given to Bishop initially and then was going to retrieve to bring back. That would make an awful lot of sense. It would be something that would definitely be pro-Fremont. And it would even be with 15 stars, it would sort of have a double meaning because of their ancestor that was killed during the War of 1812, because this was the official flag at the time, although, of course, with 2 more stripes. What's really interesting about this flag from a collectability standpoint is the fact that the canton, or the blue area, rests on a red stripe. When that occurs, we call it the blood stripe or the war stripe, with the theory that this was done during wartime. Well, it was during wartime when this was made, but a lot of times we know that to just be a mistake because there were no official specifications of where the canton was supposed to fall on the striped field. So we know that it occurs outside wartime too. It's just that most of the time, throughout American history, it falls on a white stripe. For whatever reason, we don't know how people knew that or why that ended up being the case, because flags didn't have official proportions until 1912. None of that was specified, just like the number of points on the stars. But what you typically see is 5-pointed stars. So the Browns, their name really became synonymous with San Bernardino. John Brown Jr. became a teacher. One of his earliest memories in life was of 2 teachers that he loved when he was just 5 years old. He eventually was on the Board of Education, then became a lawyer. And he became a historian for the town. And he actually wrote the history of San Bernardino in 1922 in a 3-volume series. So the guy that the flag was made for was actually the historian who wrote the history of the town and the county and records all of these things. Now, he and his father were very involved in the local Society of Pioneers, the San Bernardino Society of California Pioneers. And here's our first look. After all of this, right after all of this storytelling, here's our first look at John Brown Sr. and John Brown Jr. So look at this great image. In the middle is John Brown Sr. And sitting to his right, the guy with the shorter dark beard and the gun leaning on his shoulder, is John Brown Jr. This was taken in 1893, looking pretty dapper. And, they're important people by this time. So now he is wearing suits and ties, despite what I said earlier. And we have some great pictures of the cabin in which these guys were involved in the Society of Pioneers, which seems to be really the focal point of their life. So now, here is a picture of the cabin, where this is the first of 2 cabins where the Society of California Pioneers kind of kept their stuff. I don't know, or had meetings or hung out and did whatever in the world they do. Now, the Mormons don't drink. Probably these guys drank a little bit. Maybe that's where they did it. I'm not quite sure, but here's the first cabin. This burnt down in 1873. But look at these guys. Isn't this tremendous? It's amazing that these images survive. Now, the very best part of this picture, and perhaps I think the best part of this entire thing, is the stuffed mountain lion that's on top of the cabin that looks a little worse for wear even in this picture, and the buzzard that's next to it. They may in fact be the very best thing in this entire conglomeration, flag stories and all. So this thing burns down in 1873, and we have a picture of the second cabin, which was erected in another part of town, in a different park. And here it is. Now, what I want to know is, look at this cabin. Tell me if that thing caught fire, what would happen? It would go up like a puff of smoke. I mean, it would be gone. In 5 minutes, that thing's gone. How in the world did they save the mountain lion and the buzzard, who I'll have to admit is looking pretty rough there? How did they do it? Was somebody sleeping in the cabin and was able to get up but couldn't put out the fire but got the buzzard and the cat? Or maybe, was it somebody's job when these guys got their photo taken to bring out the buzzard and the mountain lion, climb up on the top of the cabin and put them there? Hey, everybody, we're going to get a picture taken. Get the cat out. Let me go get the buzzard. Anyway, the story plays out. It's funny. One of the things that really fascinates me about this whole thing is how many times the American flag and the 4th of July come up in such a far-flung location and at, the birth of this area in terms of American history. Hardly anybody lives there, remember. So in 1841, a guy named Daniel Sexton, who moves to what would become the San Bernardino Valley, establishes himself there, and by 1842 is paying local Native Americans, Kalila Indians, to help transport timber from where it's being felled to local ranches, of which there could have been hardly any, I wouldn't imagine. Hardly anybody lived there. And he married the daughter of Chief Solano, who one day asked him, "Isn't there anything that your culture celebrates with feasts?" To which he answered, "Yeah." And he held one, and he raised an American flag with 26 stars on a flagpole on the 4th of July, 1842. This is before Fremont, before any of these guys are there. Amazing. Where did he get it? Did he have Native Americans make it? It doesn't seem so, but there's no more to the story that I'm aware of, but that's just incredible. Here is John Brown Jr. much later in 1919 with a guy named Sheldon Stoddard, who was born in 1830. In the background, you can see the Stars and Stripes. See it there? John Brown Sr. is known to have flown Stars and Stripes at all of his camps in the mountains. And here he is at one of those camps with the Stars and Stripes in the background. And here is a photo of Brown on the courthouse steps in San Bernardino. You can see his position indicated by the arrow, with a huge contingent of Native Americans whom he was known to defend. Here you can see John Brown Sr. in 1864 at the old Mormon monument at Arrowhead Springs. Dr. David Noble Smith, founder of the Arrowhead Springs Health Spa, is off to the left, and John Brown Sr. is behind the monument in the center of the photo. Here is John Brown Jr. in an image wearing a badge from the Society of Pioneers, much later, 20th century. Other things included with this flag are several handwritten letters from the family, a family tree, poems, and a wonderful law journal from the late 19th century with just page after page after page of notes that tell something about his legal career at that time. Wonderful thing to have. Also included here is this wonderful and very elaborate, huge certificate, beautifully engraved to denote the membership of John Brown Sr. into the Society of the California Pioneers. Just a great thing to have with this flag to stand as some of its documentation, as well as another wonderful, very decorative, beautiful object. And my special thanks to Mr. Shaw of the Historical and Pioneer Society of San Bernardino, who helped tremendously by being very generous with his help in my research on the object. Anytime you find these kinds of features in this wonderful ware on an early example like this, it's just amazing. This is an amazing thing with the history and the graphics and the features, perfect for just really any advanced flag collection, or is that one great flag to hang in your house. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.